Okay, so today we're going deep, like really deep, into something super interesting.
Yeah, definitely fascinating stuff.
It's all about these points where uh, verses from the Quran, they seem to kind of line up with what we know from modern science.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we're going to be looking at we've got some excerpts from a text actually that does a really good job of highlighting those places where those two things seem to connect.
And, just looking over this stuff beforehand, I was like, whoa, whoa,
Yeah?
this is really, really something. But we're not, trying to like prove or disprove anything here.
Right.
It's more about, just sort of exploring these connections, seeing what we can see and thinking about what it all means.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's really about sparking curiosity and just kind of prompting some reflection, I think. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah.
It's fascinating stuff.
Okay, so let's start with creation, right?
Sorry.
The very beginning. The Quran, like specifically in Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 30, it talks about the heavens and the earth and how they were one thing, joined together, but then they got separated.
Uh-huh.
The verse actually says, "Have those who disbelieved not considered that the heavens and the earth were a joined entity and we separated them?"
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's pretty powerful imagery, right?
Oh, for sure, yeah. And what's so interesting, I think, is how that idea of a unified beginning, it actually it echoes in a way what we understand about the Big Bang.
It's like bang. Right.
The Big Bang Theory. This idea that, the universe started from this incredibly tiny point and then bam, this huge expansion. It's still expanding, by the way.
Yeah, well,
Leading to, well, everything we see today, the stars, galaxies, you name it.
and it's amazing to think about, right?
It really is.
Like, we're not saying that the Quran, like, scientifically predicted the Big Bang.
Right.
But, it does offer this really thought-provoking perspective on how it all began, and it's something scientists are still, exploring and trying to fully understand.
For sure. I mean, the origin of the universe, that's a question that continues to kind of drive scientific inquiry.
Absolutely, yeah. So, okay, let's move on to something a bit more, I guess, down to earth.
Okay.
Let's talk about water.
Water, all right.
The Quran doesn't just, like, mention water, it goes into detail about rain, rivers, oceans. There's this one verse, Surah An-Nur, verse 45, and it says, "Allah sends down rain from the sky and gives life thereby to the earth after its lifelessness." There's almost like a poetic quality to it,
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, beyond the poetry, there's almost a sense of a system there, right? Like when you read that verse, you almost imagine the cycle.
A cycle, yeah.
Rain falling down, bringing life to the dry earth, and then somehow, going back up to start the whole thing over again.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how that idea really aligns with what we know about the water cycle today.
Right.
Evaporation, condensation, precipitation, this intricate process. And it seems like the Quran was kind of, alluding to that centuries ago.
Yeah, like it was hinting at these connections all along. It's fascinating.
It is. It is.
Okay, so speaking of connections, let's switch gears again.
Okay.
Let's talk about how humans develop, in the womb. Surah Al-Mu'minun, verses 13 and 14, they give this really vivid description, of how we go from a sperm drop to a clinging clot, then a lump of flesh, then bones forming, and finally, being covered with flesh.
Right.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and it is. And those verses, they might not be using the technical scientific language that we use today to talk about embryology, but they paint this remarkably accurate picture of how a fetus actually develops, starting from a single cell. It multiplies, it differentiates, forms these different layers.
Yeah.
And eventually it takes on the shape that we recognize as a human being. And the Quran's emphasis on these stages, on this gradual progression, that's something that really aligns with what we've observed through modern science.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
It's like these ancient descriptions. They're almost foreshadowing what we've discovered through science, centuries later.
Right.
Okay, so let's go from the microscopic, the tiny stuff, to something much bigger, something colossal. The Quran also talks about mountains, and not just like, how beautiful they are. Surah An-Naba, verses 6 to 7, they describe mountains as being firmly rooted, almost like pegs that are like holding the earth steady. It's not just about their beauty, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, we often look at mountains and we think of, the majestic peaks, the views, but the Quran, it highlights this other crucial role that they play, a role that's not as obvious.
Right.
It's about stability. And And, that actually reflects what we understand in modern geology about mountains. They have these deep roots that extend far down into the Earth's crust. And these roots, they act like anchors. Yeah, and they actually contribute to the tectonic stability of the Earth.
So they're like holding everything together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They help prevent those shifts, those seismic shifts that can cause earthquakes and things like that. It's really a reminder that, even these things that seem so static, so unchanging, they have a really profound impact on how our planet functions.
It's like there's this whole hidden world beneath our feet that we don't even think about.
Yeah.
But it's keeping things balanced, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty amazing.
Okay, so let's dive into something even more mysterious now.
Okay, let's do it.
The unseen world. Surah Al-Kahf, verses 94-95. They describe Dhul Qarnayn. He's this figure who's on this journey, and he comes across these people, and they seem to be shielded from the sun by this barrier.
Right.
So it's like, what is this barrier?
Yeah, it makes you wonder, right? I mean, obviously it's a story. It's not a direct scientific explanation.
Right.
But it does raise some interesting questions, What might they have perceived as this barrier back then? It wasn't microbiology, of course, but it does suggest that, even way back then, there was this awareness of things beyond what we can see with our naked eye, things that we wouldn't be able to understand, really, until we had the tools, the scientific methods that came centuries later.
So it's like the Quran is hinting at this whole world of the microscopic,
right? A
world that we now know, thanks to microscopes, is teeming with microorganisms.
Exactly. Microorganisms that, play a huge role in our lives in so many ways. And it's really interesting how this focus on the unseen, it connects with the way the Quran also talks about celestial bodies, the sun and moon, and their impact on our planet.
Yeah, that's a really cool connection. So after this incredible journey, this deep dive, what's the big takeaway?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that the Quran, while it is definitely a religious text, it also touches on a lot of aspects of the natural world.
Yeah.
And it does so in ways that, often align with what we've learned through modern science.
It's amazing, honestly.
It is.
And it really makes you think, about how the pursuit of knowledge, whether it's through faith or through scientific inquiry, maybe those paths aren't so different after all.
Right.
Maybe they actually kind of converge, and they both help us to understand the universe and our place in it.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So a final question for everyone listening out there. How do these connections between ancient wisdom and modern science, how does that shape your own view, your own perspective on the relationship between faith and scientific inquiry? It's something to think about, right? And I encourage you to explore these source materials for yourself. Do your own deep dive and see what fascinating insights you might discover. You never know what you might find.
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
There's always more to explore.
Absolutely. All right, that's all for this deep dive, folks. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone. We're